Cameras is on. So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We just want to make sure that everyone can see us. So, hold on a second. Cameras is on. Uh-oh, I have to mute one. So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. All right. Sorry about that. So, welcome to the Muslim Professional Group podcast series. And today we have Brother Omar Qadeer with us, and we will be discussing a very sensitive topic, which is domestic violence. So, Brother Omar Qadeer, without further ado, please go ahead and help us introduce yourself. Let us know a little bit more about your background, your experience, and how long you've been practicing.
Assalamu alaikum. Um, Good evening to everybody. My name is Omar Qadeer. I am an attorney in New Jersey, also licensed in New York. I have been practicing for over 15 years now. I have, in addition to the law degree, I also have a master's in psychology and criminal justice. But we focusing on law, I guess I'm pretty well known now for matrimonial matters and domestic violence and some other areas of law. But and right here in Central Jersey is where I'm located in North Brunswick.
Very good. So thank you so much. So tell us a little bit more about what type of cases in particular do you take on?
Like I said, I'm probably more well known for the matrimonial matters and domestic violence matters, but I also do the related immigration matters, and there's also often municipal matters, business matters, and other things like wills and prenups that I also draft. But traffic matters, assaults, and shoplifting, I also handle those.
Very good. That's a lot. So I'm so glad you're here with us if anyone needs those services. The other thing I want to talk about, domestic violence, especially, within our Muslim communities, right? Do you see or notice any difference in the type of clients you get with domestic violence?
Well, as far as the differences, I would say that one thing that people often have a common misconception of is the age of
Right.
the people involved. And it can range and often ranges anywhere from new couples to
Mhm.
couples who've been married for a couple years. Even yesterday, I had a case where the couple have been married for over 50 years, and it was a restraining order trial,
Right.
which lasted 2 days.
Mhm.
Um, the couple was 70, 75, over 75 and 80, and so uh,
Right.
now there's a final restraining order entered. So it happens at any age, and it just depends on at what stage people take that step forward to actually come forward and say enough is enough.
Right. Um, so that's really good that you highlighted that. And also, I'm sorry, I think we lost you for a minute. We can't,
Can you hear me?
now I can hear you. Yeah, very
Okay,
good.
sorry.
All right, excellent. So also, do you get like males and females, especially when it comes from a culture standpoint, right? Um, a lot of, yeah, a lot of men, I would say, like, I understand some women may open up about domestic violence, but do you see some men as well, coming up with the topic?
I have clients on both sides, so there's men and women who
Okay.
can be victims of domestic violence, and it's usually there's one figure who's the dominant one in the marriage, and so
Right.
it can go either way. A lot of people assume it's going to be the woman who's the victim, but I've had several cases where it's actually the man.
Oh, it's very sad. That's why we said it's a very sensitive topic, but it's also very important that we discuss these topics within our communities. So how does one actually, so now we hear about restraining orders, domestic violence, there is issues. So can you tell us a little bit more about restraining orders? What are they? How do they get placed, and what is the actual process of having a restraining order?
So, restraining order, and in New Jersey, it starts as something called a temporary restraining order, TRO for short. And so, what that means is that one party cannot approach the other party in any way, directly or indirectly.
Mhm.
And oftentimes, especially uh, from people in our culture, they tend to not always follow the rules. And so, sometimes people are going to call uh, a relative and say, hey, tell that person to dismiss this restraining order that they have against me. But it's very easy to get a violation against you. So that's something I usually warn people about. Don't do that because they ask questions later and arrest first in those situations. But as far as how to get a restraining order, there's a couple of different ways to do that. One main way is just to, if there's a situation that arises, you call the police, 911, or you'll go to the police station and you basically let them know that you're in danger, and you have to let them know what act just immediately happened. And so, uh, and if it's not as urgent, some officers don't usually um, uh, uh, listen to the actual problem. They might say, just go to the family courthouse tomorrow. And that's the other way to actually get it, going to the family courthouse. The thing with the police, sometimes it's just about the paperwork and they don't want to do it. And
Okay.
so the people have the right to actually go to the police station and say, no, I want you to put the judge on the phone and ask them. I've had situations where the police have given a restraining order just over a photo that was ripped up and the person felt threatened. And in another situation, uh, my client's sitting at the police station after she's getting her arm cut up, and the police still won't give the restraining order.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and so in that situation, obviously, we had to get the judge on the phone, and the judge granted the restraining order right away. But after the TRO was entered, usually within a few days or a few weeks, the court will schedule something called a restraining order hearing, final restraining order hearing, to determine whether or not the actual TRO should turn into FRO, final restraining order. And
Mhm.
oftentimes, what can happen is if it doesn't go to trial, um, there's well, if the one party, so there's a couple of different ways. You can either dismiss it, you can take it to trial and see what happens, and if the judge wants to grant it, or sometimes people work out an agreement and say, look, we'll stay away from each other, but these are the terms, and that's a easy way to work out some terms, so then domestic violence doesn't happen again in the future.
So I have a question also just to carry on with restraining orders. Can anyone, like, let's say they're having issues, right? Like they're having some marriage issues and they decided they're not into agreement with certain things, right? But they haven't, like, the woman or the male or the husband or the wife, one of the spouse, it doesn't matter, haven't really done anything to hurt their partner, or there isn't anything relating to domestic violence. Can they still file a restraining order without having a legitimate reason?
Well, and some police will say that no, well, nobody got slapped or kicked or punched.
Mhm.
Domestic violence doesn't mean it has to be physical. It can be
Okay.
emotional, it can be verbal. There can be the threats to harm or kill.
Mhm.
And so it can be a number of different things. And so people often assume that, well, if I didn't get hurt, I can't get a restraining order. That's not how it is, especially if
Okay.
there's been a history of any kind of domestic violence as well.
Right.
So, like I said, the example about the person with the ripped up picture, there
Mhm.
was nothing physical in that one, but they ended up with a
Right.
final restraining order in that situation just because of the amount of harassment involved and the person felt threatened.
I see what you're saying. So how about there are children involved and there is a restraining order, but then there was no harm or any signs of harm to the children. So how would they be able to kind of like help with that?
Well, the person who gets the restraining order first, they often are the ones who get at least interim custody right away.
Mm,
And the other person is then cut off from seeing the kids, at least until they can request parenting time or until uh, the court can make some other kind of decision at the next hearing. But and one thing I want to clear up also, it doesn't have to be between spouses only that somebody gets a restraining order. As long as there's some kind of domestic relationship that they have, you can still apply for a restraining order. I've had cases involving siblings, involving parent-child, and so there's a lot of different uh, uh, types of restraining orders, but or situations. But the most common one is obviously either the spouse or the boyfriend girlfriend situation.
right, right, right. Well, So again, every situation is different. And if they have any questions, I'm sure you will share your information later if anyone needs to contact you and learn a little bit more about that. Another thing I'd like to understand, we have annulment and divorce, right? So what is really the difference between annulment and divorce?
Okay, so annulments, what that means is that the marriage is treated as if it no longer exists anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So it is erased from history as if it just never existed. And it can be based on a number of different reasons, but one common reason is fraud, including immigration fraud. Another common thing could be misrepresentation. Sometimes it's the case of bigamy, which means that the person's already married to somebody else, and
Mm-hmm.
that happens quite a bit. And then there's also just the court's discretion as far as whether or not this is a situation where people deserve an annulment. And sometimes, and it really depends on the judge. It's it can be tough to get a restraining order in some situations. Oh, sorry, not restraining order, annulment in some situations, but and some judges are really willing to give it. Uh, but oftentimes, what happens is, where it comes up in uh, situations in New Jersey, especially, is because we have a lot of immigrants here.
Right.
And I get a lot of these situations just about every week where somebody comes to my office and says, "Oh, this person, I've sponsored them. They came into the country, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and as soon as they got their green card, they ran away."
Mm-hmm.
Or the opposite side of things, where somebody comes in and says, "Well, I came here on a green card. I've been getting abused by my spouse and their
Mm-hmm.
family. I'm basically getting treated like a servant." And
Right.
what can I do now? And so
Mm-hmm.
if it's the spouse who's the one who sponsored the green card, oftentimes if they tell me that it's a situation where they're just using me for the green card,
Right.
we file for uh, the annulment and say based on immigration fraud. And it's the same court that handles the divorces. So if the court's not going to give you an annulment in the end, they're still going to be willing to give you a divorce, uh, whether it's a no fault or on some other basis. But oftentimes that becomes a very contested issue. I have a
Mm-hmm.
couple cases like that right now where, for example, one client I think of right now, uh, he sponsored his spouse, and she came in uh, last year in April, and within a few days after receiving her green card, which came in about 2 weeks, she went to the police and made up a fake restraining order case against
Oh,
him
wow. Mm-hmm.
and filed assault charges. And he's just like, "What happened?" And so, in another situation, I recall the person waited 2 years for his spouse to come here and
Mm-hmm.
then requested a separate room for them to stay in once they got here. And then once the green card came in, uh,
Right.
they ran away again. And so this happens quite often. And it's not, although I gave two examples of females doing that, it's oftentimes also the males. And so
I
uh,
see.
several times, actually, it's over the past few years, actually, there's been
Mm-hmm.
several situations where uh, my clients have come to me and said, "Well, I got married to this guy, and
Mm-hmm.
in some cases, they've had a child with the person."
Right.
Then we find out that they've also married somebody else in
Oh,
whichever country,
right.
and in some cases, they've already had two or three kids over the course of the marriage. So, uh,
So this is very impressive. Oh my God, thank you so much for sharing that. But again, to my understanding, annulment, it has to be within a specific number, like it has to be within less than a year of marriage, or it doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter. It doesn't
Okay.
matter. Some people are filing for the annulment several years afterwards, but that's a common misconception also. Some people think it has to be done within a year, but
Mhm.
people have filed for it even well afterwards. And some people they don't know about it and they regret it later
I
because they get a divorce and then they realize that, wait, I should have actually filed for an annulment if I knew what it was.
I
And
see what
so
you're saying.
it's still a concept that some people are not as familiar with.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you also discussed a lot of like, with immigration issues, especially there's a lot going on right now, and maybe not a lot of people are aware of that. Um, so another thing we want to just, since, the Muslim professional group caters for, there's a lot of Muslims are, needing the help, trying to understand. Can you share a little bit of any resources that you feel or any organization that can help and assist Muslim people that are in need?
Yes. Well, there are a few in New Jersey. One of them, for example, is Waffle House, not Waffle House, Waffle House in North Jersey. And so it's an organization that's set up for exactly this situation. But I know that they're very overwhelmed, and sometimes they just have to turn people away because there's just too many people they have to assist.
Right.
There's a South Asian organization called Manvi,
Mhm.
which also exists. And I know one of the head attorneys over there, she's also often very overwhelmed.
Mhm.
Uh, so there's definitely a need for additional help for people who need it. But there are organizations which are not Muslim centric, but exist to help people in this situation. And it's there's actually even funding available. So if somebody does become a victim of domestic violence in some way, or even a victim of any kind of uh, harassment or assault, you don't have to have a restraining order for it, but
Mhm.
you can still there's an option to apply for the state for assistance with something called the VCCO. And so it's for victims' compensation. And so they provide support, they provide even sometimes medical assistance. And there's a certain amount that it goes up to. I believe it's about 25,000 to 35,000 range, but they can even reimburse or pay attorney's fees up to about 10,000. And
Oh,
so
wow.
when people think that they don't have an option for assistance, I mean, that's not totally accurate. So they will pay for part of those counsel fees. And is this something that a lot of people are just unaware of? And so there is that option to get assistance there, even if you have a private attorney. But the only downside to that one is that sometimes it takes time to get the attorney paid. So sometimes it's not something that people want to jump on right away. But
Right.
yeah.
And then are there any like financial limitation that they have to meet, or like there's like, how like with everything there's like a poverty level, or it doesn't matter?
For that one, not so much. It's more
Okay.
just being a victim and that you have some kind of case active. Even if the restraining order was one that was dismissed, you still
Mhm.
have the ability to uh, file for it as long as there's some kind of case active. That's usually what they're looking for. Even if it's a divorce case, if in
Right.
the event that the restraining order has been dropped and it's only a divorce case. And that's probably a point I should stress on as well, that just because you have a restraining order, it has nothing to do with the divorce
Mhm.
initially. So you have a separate case for the restraining order, you have a separate case for divorce, and restraining orders are also separate from actual municipal or criminal charges. So if there's a case involving an assault, for example, the individual might be charged with an assault and they have to appear in court, a municipal court, or if
Mhm.
it's a aggravated assault, then probably Superior Court. But it's separate from the actual restraining order. Restraining orders are actually civil in nature, and uh, but you do get fingerprinted at the end, so it can cause problems with somebody's immigration status if they're a green card holder on a visa. And that situation comes up quite often in New Jersey as well. But there's always people, whether they're on a H1, L1 visa,
Right.
workers visa, or even on the green card. That's actually grounds for uh, termination of the person's permanent resident status if they get found, if they get convicted.
I see. So right now, especially like, let's say, with these resources, if one victim, well, let me rephrase the question. If the person that applied for the restraining order and really they weren't a victim, but they wanted to kind of act on it first, and the other person may have been a victim but did not act on it, do they qualify for any of these resources or?
So you can have cross restraining orders, and that happens quite a bit. That
Okay.
and some people just use that as a weapon too. I had a situation today, for example, where my client, she's had a restraining order for a month, and the other side, just to make things more difficult, he went and got one against her as well. So now there's cross restraining orders which have to be addressed when time comes for trial. So, and, and it does make a difference sometimes who gets it first and how late afterwards the other person gets theirs.
Mhm.
But I've had situations where the actual victim applies for one first, the other side just gets in retaliation, and then I've seen the other side even win. I mean, sometimes people are not uh, as credible when they're testifying in court, which means that
Right.
sometimes people are just better at telling a story to the court. And all that matters when you're trying to get a restraining order in front of a judge is which person is more believable. And if one person is more credible,
Mhm.
that's probably the person who's going to win uh, in most situations.
I see. The other question I have, since now we're sorry about that. So another thing I wanted to ask, when we get married, right? Especially in the Muslim communities, we have dowries like mahr, we have like other, it's even as Egyptians, like we have something that not just the dowry, like there's an upfront payment that gets paid when, when you get married. So in this cases, like are these being recognized or factored into matrimonial proceeding or even into domestic violence cases?
So you're probably referring to the Islamic Nikah documents and the meher, which is referenced within those documents. And so, and the answer is yes, they are recognized. There's a case called Odatala versus Odatala, a New Jersey case, where the meher is actually um, the meher portion of the Nikah contract is recognized as a simple contract. And so when somebody files for the divorce, on top of whatever else they can get in New Jersey, on top of the alimony, on top of the distribution of assets, they can also request enforcement of the mayor. And sometimes the mayor is, small and, really insignificant, so people don't bother with it. But in some cases, it's pretty substantial, and so people do want to pursue it. And so the case law actually says yes, you can have that enforced. And there's always those questions about. What happens if it's the woman who files first? Is she still entitled to it? Or if it's the male who files first? And so there's a lot of discussion about that. But and as far as whether the Nikah documents or even this religious marriage is recognized in New Jersey, uh, that's so the documents recognized, but
Mhm.
the court doesn't really take into consideration anything relating to the religious what needs to get done as far as the religious divorce.
Right.
So but you can still get a divorce, a legal divorce, even if you get a religious marriage done. But as far as whether or not it'll be recognized, as long as it's legal where it happened, it's going to be seen as something recognized over here.
I see. Thank you so much for sharing that. So another question, how do you really help Muslim clients navigate through the religious guilt, especially in our culture and even I would say as Muslim and also culturally, like non-Muslim and culturally as well, where they say, stay in the marriage, things will be fixed. However, they're afraid to leave such an abusive marriage, right? So how do you help them navigate?
As far as how to help them navigate that, and so one thing I also want to clear up is that I don't sit in my office and think, how can I get these people divorced? I make sure that they know what they're getting into, and I ask this question up front: is this a situation where you can still save the marriage? And if it is, then maybe there are steps that you need to do there first. Because if you're just using a case like a restraining order to get an advantage, you have to be very careful because it's a slippery slope. Once you start it, it's very, very hard to go back. Because the other side is probably just going to want to retaliate. And it's never going to be the same again. So I make sure to ask them, are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you want to proceed? Um, and most times people have already decided by the time they come to me that, you know what, I've had enough, uh, and it's their decision. But I still tell them, like, look, maybe you want to talk to, well, sometimes they do come with a third party, and they often say, like, look, I've been talking to this person, and they've been my guide here, and they're the ones who finally convinced me that I should do this. And so it's always good to have that support there. And so sometimes that's what people need, and that's to help with their, I mean, you can call it guilt or fear in leaving the abusive marriage, um, but it's more about just getting that courage to take that step to move forward.
Yeah, I think, and I also you kind of said witness in one of those, like when they go to court. So can people actually request to have witnesses to go to court with them? Even though if they were like simply involved to help with the situation, or maybe to help them like resolve their problems in a civil way before, they go into like divorce and everything like that.
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on what you're calling them to be a witness for. I mean, if you're calling them to be a witness for some domestic violence that they actually witnessed, um, that's something they can definitely be called for. But it's if it's a situation where you're just calling them just because they're a friend and they know that you're going through a tough time, I mean, it's probably less likely they're going to have too much to say because they've only seen one side of the story. Um, but in some cases, the judge will allow people to testify that, oh well, this person was reached out to as soon as that domestic violence happened. So even though they're not a direct witness, they're witness to how the person behaved right afterwards.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So again, do you collaborate with any imams or Muslim community leaders when situations like that, And then do you also, the second part of the question, how do you ensure that those interactions are survivor-centered?
So the answer is yes. I do sometimes collaborate, but I try to limit my interactions with what's going on with the imams or with the community leaders when they're trying to get involved with um, if you want to call it saving the marriage or just trying to, mediate it. The reason being is that, if an imam's trying to talk to people about saving a marriage, it's not going to probably be helpful to have a divorce lawyer sitting there and just, as the open option. So I often do tell people, and sometimes it has worked, where I tell them, look, why don't you take your spouse, see if they want to go to an imam and try to talk it out with them. And sometimes they have asked me to go with them, and I decline because I think it's just inappropriate.
Right.
And because I'm not a marriage counselor, even though they might feel comfortable talking to me. It's I'm not there for that purpose. And so it's better to have those other people involved. So my role in that is to send them there to see if there is any hope, and if
Right.
not, I mean, I'm there.
I see. Through your experience and expertise, especially in a lot of these cases, do you think like the Muslim community leaders have anything to offer or to better address domestic violence, either for males and females? Do you think there is a lack of any resources on that end?
Yeah, I 100% think there's a complete lack of resources available for people in these situations. And that's part of the reason why people continue going on dealing with these situations for several years. Because nobody, even though they might know something's not right, they just don't do anything. It's more of a taboo issue. People think that, like it's not my business. I shouldn't really get involved with it. But there needs to be uh, some more resources available uh,
Mm,
for people in the Muslim community for how to address these issues. And I'm not saying for how to come forward and get a restraining order or get a divorce,
right.
even if it's for counseling or just, and there's counseling available. There's several options for that in this state, but sometimes it's hard to take that step to reach out to a counselor and schedule an appointment and do all that. Sometimes it's easier to walk into some place like a mustard and say, look, is there someone available who can help with this situation? And
Mhm.
so I think that that needs to be worked on. And the actual organizations and mustards and so forth, they need to actually be prepared for that and not be afraid to get involved with what happens afterwards or and trying to solve the problem because it's just going to continue happening then.
And I think, you hit like very important points here. And I think it also helps a lot if the masajids or the mosque are open to hosting these conversations within the masjid, right? Because the more we try to normalize, I'm not saying we're normalizing domestic violence, but talking about the topic that it does happen within our community, within our culture. And again, when I say even though it's a Muslim professional group, but we even culturally, people that are non-Muslim may have the same issues, so I think just opening up and speaking about these topics is very important. And then you bring a lot of awareness that way as well. And this leads me to the second question, where do you feel that some of your clients are really afraid, like they are experiencing some domestic violence, but they're afraid to deal with it or speak about it because they're gonna feel alienated from their faith, their community once they open up?
Yeah, 100% again. I think that that's something that people often say when they walk in, like, look, people know me in the community and like I didn't want to come forward with this, but I felt
Mhm.
like I had to. But, what I often tell people is, look, you have to focus on you and your mental health. But the bigger thing is that at the end of the day, nobody cares. Nobody really cares. And they
Right.
might talk about things for a day or two, like, oh, you know what,
Mhm.
that person's going through that. But
Right.
uh, it's not really their business. And everybody has the same problems with somebody in their family. So it's not just that person. Everyone's dealing with it in some way. They see it in their families where, something like this is happening. And so I think people don't realize that because it's such a sheltered topic and that people don't talk about it
Right.
in the community that much. And so, uh, except when, but when it's briefly brought up, like this person is going through this or that. But again, like at the end of the day, people have their own problems
Mhm.
and um, they just need to worry about themselves and making sure that their future is secure.
Absolutely. So, just to relate to that as well, how do you handle some of the cases when there is a lot of pressure, I would say either from family members, from community members, or community leaders that really trying, the word that you always hear, you guys have children together, try to stay together, right? But they don't look like even could staying in that marriage may not help the children, right? So how do you handle these cases when you feel there's some pressure or your clients feel pressure from outsiders?
Yeah. And so, yeah, I often call that divorce by committee, where it's not just the person, it's the family members are more involved sometimes than the
Mhm.
actual individual
Right,
whose case it is. And that's not the way it should be. Uh,
right.
it's because then what ends up happening later on is as the case progresses, the family members, they are moving things forward for the wrong purposes, whether it's for
Mhm.
financial benefit or it's just because maybe if there's kids involved, maybe they're more attached to the kids and they're like, oh, we don't want the kids to go to that person's house,
Right.
and be part of that person's life. We want full control over them,
Mhm.
and we want to make sure that you get uh, these assets and so forth,
Right, right,
And
right.
so rather than thinking about ways to uh, really, save the marriage or even try to solve any problems so then it ends up in an amicable way, they
Mhm.
end up making things worse. And so that's something which I think it's going to take some time for things to really change for that because part of that's just the culture.
Absolutely. Has that recently changed or anything? You feel like there's any improvement or throughout the years with the cases that you have been handling or anything like that?
I think that it's it has stayed about the same as far as
Mm.
families getting involved sometimes when they shouldn't be.
Right,
But it's mostly for, I guess, the newer immigrant families or first generations. I've seen that like the people who've been here for a while or even have been born here,
right.
oftentimes like they're willing to really take the lead on their own case and try to handle things themselves.
Right.
But it's a lot of times the situations where it's more of a tight-knit family who's still newer here, which I see like everyone's involved. And I oftentimes have to tell people, look, you're not supposed to be calling the office. It's actually a confidentiality issue also.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, but people still insist on calling in, trying to get information. We tell them, look, we can't answer your questions. And, people don't like it, but it is what it is. We have to follow the rules.
Absolutely, I agree with you 100%. So the other question that I want to kind of understand, especially with courts, you know how within our cultures or our religion, we have Islamic nikah, which is marriage. We get married religiously in our mosque and things like that. Is that being recognized by the New Jersey courts?
So what often happens is that the actual NICA document will go and has to get registered then with the state. And
Hmm.
so, but like I said, I mean, like religious marriage, it'll still be recognized and people can still get a divorce based on that. But
Hmm.
uh, but I've seen several cases where sometimes people try to get away with that and not register and say that, well, I'm not really married to you.
Right.
And that's why um, I can seek these other benefits or like I mean such as like calling in like another spouse from overseas or things like that. And so that's something which has happened quite often in the past couple of years I've seen where people uh, are married over here and one spouse might be sometimes in some situations they get the green card through that spouse. But we find out that the spouse is married internationally and has several kids or one or two kids. So like but the nikah here is still valid. The nikah over internationally is not. So because it's whichever happened first.
I see. So that leads me to the question, does the international marriage get recognized here? If it was before or after, you're saying it doesn't.
Well, if it's registered, I mean, if it's international and it's registered, and it happened first, then the one over here probably wouldn't count. And
Mm.
so there's been several situations like that, both ways back and forth, where,
Right,
people have got the nikah over here, they registered, and then they get married internationally, or
right.
not, get the nikah done internationally. So
Mhm.
the if you're married over here, the one internationally is not going to be recognized.
Right. So, thank you so much. You have been sharing a lot of information. Like I learned a lot myself. But again, I just want to ask that question because I want to know like what type of clients you accept, especially like I understand when people log into to this podcast and it says Muslim professional group. So do you accept, clients from different backgrounds, different religion, different faith, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I have clients from just about every background almost, and so like it's not just Muslim clients that I assist, but yeah, a big chunk of the population of the client population I have is I would say is Muslim because I think over the past 15 years or so I've gotten more well known in the community,
Mhm.
but a lot of people still don't think or know that there's Muslim attorneys in the area, but
Absolutely.
they find out afterwards when they're searching. Yeah.
Very good. Well, again, that's why we have the Muslim professional group where we can have all these resources for our Muslim professionals and for everyone else that can utilize them. So how can people really reach out if they have more information? I mean, if they need more information, they have questions or they would like to hire you for any case.
So, I mean, oftentimes people just phone into my office and we schedule a free phone consult. And, I honestly, like I do get a lot of calls and
Mhm.
sometimes I can't answer everybody's question right away, but usually the domestic violence related ones, because the situation is more urgent, I tend to call those people back right away. But sometimes it's just, one week is busier than the next. So I try to get to everybody, but I do offer that free initial consult over the phone. And then uh, I do what I can. I give that consult, and then if they choose to come in and get started, we do that. But um, yeah, it's there's there is options out there, but people just have to be careful about who they select also. There's a lot of firms out there which, even Muslim firms, which are only after your assets and they will drag the case out until you're empty. I
Oh,
don't do that to my clients. Like um, I'm not I try to keep things honest as I can. And
mhm.
but I have seen that quite a bit where uh, attorneys just drag things out, and you just have to be very careful of those kinds of attorneys, and because you can end up with a bill that's a couple 100,000 before you know it.
Oh, wow, absolutely. Well, before we end this, because we have learned so much, I would like to learn a little bit more about your ship wheel logo. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, you can see the Q in it, but a couple of years ago, I can't remember which where I acquired it, but it was a decoration piece which had a ship wheel on it.
Oh,
Um, and one of my assistants, they looked at it and they said, "Hey, you know what? We can make that into a cube." And then from there, it was just more like we said, well, that theme stuck. I mean, let us navigate you through life's waters. Let us steer you through life. Let us be your lifetime lawyers and let us guide you. And so, yeah, it's become kind of our theme as far as uh, letting us navigate you all through life's problems. And so, not just matrimonial stuff. And I guess like that's a good time to mention. I also have a new associate I added, Hatem Saber, who's helping with other matters now. Who he's starting his own divisions with civil matters, non-lieutenant matters, and more. So we are growing as a firm too. So if we can't help you, then we'll find somebody who can.
that's amazing. Well, thank you so much. On behalf of the entire Muslim Professional Group team, I would like to thank you for taking the time to address a very, very sensitive topic, especially within our communities. And again, we will add your information from the, brother Omar Qadeer from Qadeer Law LLC, if that's correct. And then we'll send if you have like any questions or anything like that. I'm sure we'll put his phone number and his email so you can just message them directly. And thank you so much, and you have a great evening.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you so
Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
much.